Welcome to another episode of Tips from My Garage. My name is Lisiate Tonga. I'm the father of two beautiful boys, husband to a beautiful wife, owner of online business Upgrade Version U.0, and author of ebook Q&A Between Two Addicts. And today I want to talk to you all about triggers. Before I started on my recovery journey, I did try on many occasions to stop smoking or try to stop drinking. The result really never worked out. I never really got to where I wanted to go because what I didn't realize is that those two habits were intertwined. For example, I would say one day I'm just going to stop smoking and just kind of hope for the best. And what would happen is I would go out and drink. And when I drank, the first thing I wanted to do was smoke a cigarette. And the more I drank, the harder it was for me to not smoke a cigarette until finally I just gave up. It never really worked out because those two vices that I had were intertwined. And I think that was really kind of a vicious cycle that I got myself caught in because I would just go around in circles every now and then wanting to quit something and never really making any headway. So we all have triggers. I think that in this day and age, triggers, when used in conjunction with addiction recovery, it's got a stigma. The term addiction also carries with it a stigma. We're all on the addiction spectrum in one way or another for a lot of things, whether they're good or bad. So some might say that I have a strict routine for health and fitness, but others might say that it is an addiction. And perhaps I'm just replacing one addiction with another addiction. And I think if you frame it that way, it carries with it a stigma. But if you use different terminology, such as routine or a positive good habit, then there's no stigma. But I think that if we could redefine the term trigger, perhaps calling it something else that's more neutral. I know that Charles Duhigg, who is the author of The Power of Habit, calls it a cue. He calls a trigger a cue. And I like that. But I think we could also call it something else. Perhaps we could call it a signal. But if we can call it something like a signal or a cue, like it's just your brain signaling to you that there's a particular set of behaviors that are going to be put into play now, that are going to be implemented. That's really what a trigger does. In the addiction recovery space, there is an acronym that is commonly used to help people to identify triggers, and that is HALT, HALT, and that stands for hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. Those are all common triggers that we have that set off a specific set of behaviors that are already ingrained in us to operate, because these are things that we're very used to doing on a day by day basis or on a regular basis. So, for instance, if you're hungry, you eat. If you're angry, you might act out. If you're lonely, you might act out. If you're tired, you go to sleep. Every one of us has a particular set of signals that are set off in our brains that help us to implement the behaviors that are associated with them. When you're trying to learn more about yourself, there are two stages. The first thing is that you learn that there is a stage that you're currently in that you may be unconscious to, which is a reactionary stage, meaning when you get triggered to do something and then you enact the behavior, then you reflect upon the behavior. There is a reaction that comes with that. It's either a good reaction or it's a bad reaction. If you if your trigger is for a behavior that is a negative behavior, then a lot of the time the reaction you have is very negative toward yourself. It's one of disgust. It could be of disgust. It could be one of self-loathing. And when you do that, you you beat yourself up. And what often happens is that keeps you a in a vicious cycle. A lot of the time people don't come to this realization until they go on a discovery or a self-discovery or a recovery journey. And when they find out about triggers and other ways that you can manage your triggers or approach your triggers, this becomes more illuminated so you can see more of what your behavior is. But one of the best ways to deal with your triggers is to observe them without judgment. Just strictly observing, no judgment, no self-loathing, no beating yourself up. Just just seeing it for what it is. You've tried so long to not look at something, but now you decide that you want to look at it because you want to see what it actually looks like. That's the difference. Being reactionary towards your triggers and your behaviors closes you off to learning anything about it, and observing opens your eyes to what's going on so that you can see yourself for what your behavior truly looks like. And I get it that people would be scared to do that. People try to avoid looking at your triggers, and people want to hide from that because they don't really want to see what's going on. They don't want to acknowledge that this is a problem. We know that if we see things for what they are, it can put us into a downward spiral emotionally, mentally, and it could force us to do other things that we perhaps don't really want to do, but feel that we're compelled to do it because it's the only way we can get some relief. However, the truth of the matter is if you cannot look at yourself for what you are doing so that you can see your behavior, so that you can better understand your behavior, then it's going to be very difficult for you to move past it. You can't fix something that you're turning a blind eye to. You can't fix a problem that you continually turn a blind eye to. You have to look at the problem, you have to observe it, you have to see what's going on in order for you to be able to properly deal with the issue. But if you keep closing your eyes or trying to avoid the behavior altogether, then how did how do you think that is going to resolve itself? Or do you think it's going to resolve itself? It's not going to resolve itself. It's going to continue to fester, and other behaviors could manifest as a result, and things can go into a downward spiral, and that wouldn't that's not good for anybody. And that can be painful, yes, because it forces you to come face to face with yourself, to look in the mirror, have a really good look in the mirror what's going on. And the other thing is if you can do it just observing with curiosity and no judgment, it's very possible you can become more empathetic towards yourself, or give yourself more grace, or be more compassionate towards yourself. You could teach yourself to be more compassionate because you can see things. You've opened your eyes to what is really going on. That is the only way that you're actually going to be able to deal with the circumstances. You've got to give yourself some grace. And when you do that, then things can start moving in the right direction. So I want to give you some tools that'll be able to help you to identify your triggers. What you can do is you can start journaling, writing down all your triggers. And one of the best ways to do this is to just take a walk with yourself through your day, recording your behaviors and how they get triggered, and record them in a journal. And it's not just recording the trigger, like I was hungry and so I decided to binge eat, or I was angry and so I decided to, bust the windows out, or I was lonely and I decided to act out, or I was tired so I started to take drugs, whatever it is. HALT is a good acronym for common triggers, but it's your triggers aren't limited to just that. There are many other things that can trigger you, and you need to record them all. But what's more important to be able to record are the circumstances surrounded the triggers. Like, how did it get to the point where you got triggered? I was at work. I hadn't eaten all day. It was 3 p.m. I was hungry. And so I decided to go out and eat some junk food or whatever, and ate it. Like, what you really want to try and understand is the circumstances surrounding the trigger so that you give it more context. And then once the trigger happens, then you'll need to record what you actually do up until the point where you get the reward for the trigger, or the reward for the behavior. So if we're using food as an example, I didn't eat all day until 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And so the closest thing to me was KFC. I went there and got 2 buckets of chicken, and then ate it. So that would be a simple way of putting together a whole story, that so that you have the whole context. Because looking at something like that as an example, if that was the case, and if that's something that you do subconsciously and that happens like on a regular basis, you could just be doing that in your mind. But if you're recording it on paper, you can see it in black and white what you're actually doing. What happens is you become more cognizant of it every time you do it. And you could still continue to do it, but the difference is that you have that awareness. And also the other difference is that you can now, you, there are some things that you could do to put in place. There are some different routines that you could put in place to replace that behavior. So, as an example, you could create your own meals before you come to work, so that you have food throughout the day to be able to do that. So that when it gets to 3 p.m., you don't have those same kind of pangs like you do when you don't go and eat. But this is what I mean about being able to see the gaps that you wouldn't otherwise see if you don't have clarity around your triggers and your behaviors. But the best way to be able to do this is to record it all, to journal about them, to say, to give it as much context as you can, so that you can see all the little things the intricate details for those particular patterns that you have. Because everything that you document, the more documented, or the more clarity you have around your behavior, the better you are going to be able to replace them with better things, and the more strategic you can be with replacing them, because of the understanding that you have of them. when you go onto a self-discovery journey, you're not becoming someone else. You're just uncovering who you really are. You're trying to peel the layers of this onion, who is you. And if you can be more compassionate and have more empathy for that person in the mirror, I know that's a hard thing to do because it's hard to look at yourself, especially when you know that things aren't right, or there may be some things that you're very unhappy about. If you can suffer the pain of doing that, of looking in the mirror and having a good look at yourself and seeing yourself for what you really are, then I know that you can be more compassionate. And if you can be more compassionate and empathetic towards yourself, you can move forward. You can take control of your life again. And that's really the most important thing here, especially if you're struggling with a vice that you can't break from, or that you feel, or that you've had for decades, that has in some ways become who you are or part of your identity. Like, what would that feel like to you if you were able to, after decades of suffering from whatever type of negative behaviors you have, to be able to finally take control of it because you finally were able to just take a good look at yourself in the mirror and understand yourself on a deeper level? You could deal with things in a more strategic and a more constructive manner. I mean, how would that feel to you if you could, if you had that control that you've never had before, perhaps? Like, wouldn't that be a great thing? Wouldn't that be a good feeling? Wouldn't that give you more hope that the next day is going to be brighter, instead of having to feel despondent and that there's nothing you can do, and just having to accept the fact that this is just who you are, when that's really not who you are? You are not the sum of the bad behaviors that you have. You're a good person with great qualities. You have a divine nature and purpose. We all do. That is God given. And that's who we really are. But we need to uncover that for ourselves. We have to do the work to uncover that. If you can push through the pain of looking at your true reality, then the result is that you're going to really meet the real you, the person that you really are. I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you next time. 1